Thank you, Madam President. Senators, I feel that my colleague from Kern asked me a question. I felt complied to reply because she asked a very important question. And there is a very important answer. I mean, this is the essence of Prop 209 was it misled Californians. It presented language that said that the university shall not discriminate. Who would not support that? And I mentioned that 60% of Latinos supported it, thinking that it was an anti-discrimination measure. But prior to that, the arguments were made that a student that had better grades had not been admitted to one of our universities because a person with less grades had, and that they were denied a spot. And that was the argument. So they made the person who was not admitted because of their, supposedly because of their race, that they were the person discriminated against. But my question in return is, if this is an anti-discrimination measure, why, since the passage of 209, do we have less students of color in our universities? Why has that gone down? If it's really about non-discrimination, that number should have increased, but it has gone down. And often I feel, when I think of Prop 209, that the best way to challenge it is, after now of 24 years of data, that we should challenge Prop 209 in the courts, because it most certainly will lose, because an anti-discrimination measure has really resulted in discrimination. And I also want to explain how this actually works out practically. And I want to give you my story, and a story of one of my schoolmates. I graduated from Point Loma High School.
What's it?
And I remember I had a friend that also went to UCLA. He was the son of a very prominent doctor and a prominent judge from San Diego. And growing up, he had tutors. He didn't have to work growing up. He never had a job. He was an excellent student, but he lived in a beautiful home in Point Loma and had a very high quality of life. And he got excellent grades. When I went to Point Loma High School, I used to get up at 4 in the morning and do my paper route. I used to deliver papers to 132 homes in my neighborhood, all before 6 a.m. I oftentimes was late because of rain or whatever factors that made me late, so I often was running after the bus. And the bus driver made a joke of it, that if I didn't arrive exactly at time and he saw me in his rearview mirror, he took off and made me run after him. I ran track and I ran cross country, so I often caught the bus at the next stop, half a mile later. But when I went to school, I did my paper route. After school, I had a job. And I often worked in my family business, and sometimes I had a job working at the shopping center at Horton Plaza in downtown. I also, as I mentioned, ran track and cross country. I started a club in Point Loma called the Spanish Club, because they wouldn't let me start a mecha. I wanted to start a mecha. And the school leaders thought it was too political. But I also was in speech club. I also was in theater. I was in jazz club. I was in marching band. And I also, was an altar boy at my church. And so what this measure did basically is when my schoolmate applied to UCLA, and when I applied, back then, I graduated at the top percentile. I graduated for distinction. I'd never read my diploma until like 20 years later, and I saw that I graduated from distinction, and I didn't even know. But when I applied to UCLA, they had an opportunity to look at the fact that I worked 20 hours a week, that I was in track and field and cross country, and that I had a new paper route, and that I was in clubs, and I was in theater, and I was in music. And they evaluated me as a person that would bring something of value not only to the university, but to society. And under Prop 209, they could have only looked at my GPA and my SAT scores. So what all of you are saying by opposing this measure is it doesn't matter that I had a job and I was competing against somebody that came from an affluent home without a job. It didn't matter that I came from a disadvantaged community with lower quality schools, yet I was able to apply to college and say, I want to go to college and improve myself. I went with lots of people to school that came from poor families, that because they got a chance to go to UCLA, now are leaders in the community. They're engineers helping in Caltrans. They're plugged into our society, reversing the cycle of poverty. Now their kids don't need help because they come from a home with a parent that went to college. And there are numerous studies that have already been done, ladies and gentlemen, to show that the children of parents that went to college have a 96% chance of going to college, and the children of parents that didn't go to college have a 4% chance. Just flip it. Your likelihood of actually even wanting to go to college or even applying to college are made harder if your parents didn't go to college. You have to adjust for that in society. Why don't we look at the person, the applicant, and say, you are going to be fantastic in our university. Will you bring another skill set that we desperately need? That's where my arguments of diversity came in, and that's what I wanted all of you to understand. And I apologize if I didn't make my point. And I leave the question, again, I'll ask it one more time. If this is really an anti-discrimination measure, why is the result discrimination?